Hey, this is Kerry with Best of Us Investors, doing something a little bit different, but going to become a regular part of this channel. I'm interviewing a Seeking Alpha writer who is also a college student in studying biotech and very knowledgeable in the areas of genome sequencing and genome therapy, genome editing. He was on our channel once before, and he came and gave us some insights into NetList. Today, as I say, we're going to talk about the genome sequencing or genome editing companies. We've chosen 5 of them in particular that I have some holdings and most of my tribe has some holdings in. And we're going to analyze them. And what we're trying to figure out is who's going to be the winner in this space and how far off is the first win and then the second win, and maybe even what is the ultimate potential and how is it going to fit into our medical system. That's what we're going to talk about today. I think it's a long video, but stay with it till the end because then we're going to talk about where we're going from here. So this is my interview with Jacob. We did it on Sunday. And I think you're going to find this very enlightening. I want you then also to be invited so that you can get the notes that he has taken and what I've put together at our Discord. Go to bestofusinvestors.com. Give me your name and your email address, and I'll send you an invitation to the Discord where you can get all the backup material. So that's what I want to do today. This is not financial advice. This is financial education and maybe some entertainment. So let's get this out of the way and then we'll get right into the interview.
Best of Us Investors presents Kerry Griegmeyer.
Okay, as I promised, and welcome back, Jacob Braun. Jacob is a writer for Seeking Alpha, and for those of you who might not be familiar with Seeking Alpha, it is one of the leading online sources for investment information from independent authors, writers, and Jacob is one of them. He's also a student at Central Florida, and I'm sure you watched the Roll Tide game yesterday and saw Alabama beat Georgia. I won a bet against my wife on that one. But anyway, he has been kind enough to share some real insights, and my tribe has been very appreciative of his insights into NetList. And in our conversations, we've touched on that he's also interested in biotech. And so we've put this together basically in response to some of my tribe's questions of, okay, we're invested in these 5-6 companies. Which ones are going to be the winners in the game, and how where's the finish line? Okay, and what is it going to look like as we move towards that finish line? And Jason has shared with me a study that he found, which is about a history, pretty much, of the industry and what is the success rates, and how can you hedge your bet from past history. Jacob Wake, welcome again, and let's get into this. I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on again. That resource, that study I shared with you, I found it to be very good because it breaks it down based on the specific trial, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and then the NDA, so the new drug application. But one thing I also like about that is it breaks it down by success rate in each field. For example, oncology versus another field. Mm-hmm. And because each drug in a different field, has different approval criteria and has different success rates. So I like how it breaks it down by that also. So while we're talking about this, I guess I can talk a little bit more about just phases. I don't know how much each viewer knows about the different phase process, but basically, once you finish your trial work in a lab, for when you're working on a drug, then you go to clinical phases. There's typically 3 phases, sometimes a 4th confirmatory phase, but we won't talk much about that because it's not really relevant to most cases. But the basic process goes phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 to an NDA, which is a new drug application, which when you get approved, then you can go and market your drug and sell it. There's obviously some exceptions to this when you have accelerated approvals or BTDs, breakthrough drug designations, which speed up the process and let you skip certain things. Another thing, which we actually see a lot in CRISPR companies, is these companies are combining phases. So they'll combine a phase 1 and phase 2 trial. Sometimes I saw a lot in COVID, you saw companies combine phase 2 and phase 3 trials. So specifically what each phase means, phase 1 is specifically for testing the safety of the drug. So typically in a smaller group, you test the safety of the drug and what's the proper dosage that's safe. Phase 2 is for effectiveness and safety in a larger group. So you're kind of expanding the group a little bit, still about, that's more like seeing, does this drug work? And then finally, phase 3 is even a large group, typically a double-blind, placebo-controlled. So that's like when you think like a drug trial, that you're typically thinking of phase 3 because one person will randomly get the drug, one person randomly won't. You compare the results. Right. So when you hear about these, you can see how you can combine them because, for example, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is only for safety. So if you're using your phase 2 for safety and effectiveness, you can see why you would combine them, and that saves time and money for a company.
Okay. So the reason they break them into phase 1 and phase 2 may be financial, not regulatory. So to combine a phase, you have to get approval from the FDA, but it seems the FDA is very generous with these CRISPR companies about combining the phases because I think they think the technology is pretty safe. Okay. All right. So anything else before we get into looking at the individual companies? Yeah. Real quick, just going over, just highlighting the data in that study. Phase 1 typically has a 63% success rate. So it's most drugs that have gone through all the lab work are found to be pretty safe or they want to test the effectiveness of the drug. Okay. So 63% of drugs. So phase 1, we're testing it on human beings. Yeah, so that's the first time you're testing it on humans. You're seeing if it's safe or if there's any crazy side effects or anything. Now, this, as I understand it, some of these have been through phase 1, but it's done in a hospital situation. It may be I'll take some bone marrow out of your bone. We'll put it in a petri dish. We'll see how we'll combine it there, and then we'll put it back into your bone marrow and see what happens. Yeah, and that's. Because really, that could be a type of phase 1. Most companies give broad outlines on their phase 1 in their company presentations. But the point of that, like the situation you described, is they're just testing to see if when they put it back in, if it's going to have some crazy effect or kill someone, which would be terrible. Exactly. Yeah. And so, after that, we can go to a phase 2, or sometimes, these are combined. Sometimes you have a combined phase 2, phase 3. But we go to a phase 2. Now, this is the one that's the real phase that determines whether a drug is going to make it. So a phase 2 typically has a 30% success rate overall, and even lower in some areas, in some certain fields. Now, the reason it's so low is not because necessarily it's so difficult to get a drug to show approval. You did all the work in the lab, you've gone through a phase 1. Many of these drugs will have some effect. The thing is, a lot of companies developing these drugs, they don't have the money to maybe go through a whole phase 3 because it's very expensive. You have to pay for all the individuals. It's a much larger study. So unless a drug is a company deems valuable enough to go to a phase 3, then they'll fail a phase 2. It's very common. I don't know. I'm sure people have seen this in different companies where a company will buy a drug after a phase 2, even though it had promising results, and you question, why did this company sell it? Well, it's probably because they didn't think for themselves it was worth going through the cost of a phase 3. I understand. So this is the point where a large pharmaceutical company might step forward and say, we'll buy so many of your shares and we'll just take over the drug.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And it actually goes vice versa, because sometimes a big pharmaceutical company will be like, we have a lot of other promising drugs and we don't want to devote resources. So they'll sell it to a smaller company at a very good price.
I see. Okay. So that takes us, are we at more than likely, we're still in a hospital situation. We're not putting a needle in an arm.
Well, actually, a phase 2 is typically, from what I've seen, it's like more of an open label study. So it's more of like an actual, like you're going and taking the medicine like normal. You're not necessarily in a hospital setting.
Okay.
And it typically takes 1 to 2 years depending on the drug.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So then phase 3 is a broader spectrum than what phase 2 is.
Yeah.
Just a confirmation.
Yes. A phase 3 is a full-blown drug trial. Typically, they'll require a placebo-controlled, double-blinded. So that means that the drugs pass 2 times before it's given to the individual. So no one, the individual has no way of knowing whether they're given a placebo or the actual drug. And then those results are compared.
Okay.
And then this typically has a success rate of 58%. And it takes 3 to 9 months for the early results, which you can sometimes apply for a drug approval on, or up to 2+ years for full trial and analysis.
Okay. So now let's look at the companies that we're talking about.
Yes.
That you and I have chosen to. We're looking at Editas, Beam, CRBU, CRISPR, and NTLA. Okay.
Yes.
Now give me or share with how you looked at each of these or how you looked at them as a whole, what metrics you used, and then we'll look at each one individually.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of how I approach this is really when you're taking an approach into this, you're probably going to be like, well, I think CRISPR is a revolutionary technology, which I mean, a Nobel Prize, we'll talk more about that later, but a Nobel Prize was just won for the technology. Many people believe that it's a very revolutionary technology. So once you have this a thesis, I think it's a revolutionary technology, you're looking at what companies use it. And so then it becomes, how do I differentiate between the companies that use it? Because they're early on, and I don't know necessarily right now who the winner is going to be. So the most important thing I would say is you don't want to pick necessarily one company. You want to pick multiple. You might change your weight. So you might have one company as your favorite. But if you believe very strongly in the space, you should diversify across the space. But second with that, it comes down to 2 factors, how I looked at the companies. One, I looked at the current pipeline of the company. So where they are in drug trials, how many trials they are, do they have partnerships with big pharmaceutical companies? And then 2, what is the financial situation of the company?
Right.
Because biotechs are known for having to dilute shares a lot. And, that's not really something you want as an investor.
No, but sometimes unavoidable.
Yes.
Okay. So you gave me on each of these their total assets, their total liabilities, their last quarter operating costs. I'm going to call that a burn rate, and their drugs in clinical trials pipeline.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can go briefly over that.
Yeah.
First company we'll go is Editas Medicine. So they have 717 million in total assets, 130 million in liabilities, which puts them just under 600 million in basically cash. So right now they have a burn rate of 40 million, which puts them at a little over 2 years in operating expenses, or in time, about 3 years in time. Right. So what I specifically looked at was, how many drugs does this company have in those clinical stages we talked about? The phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. And then what's like the broad pipeline of the company? So none of these companies that I saw had anything past a phase 2.
Okay.
specifically, Editas has 2 drugs in early clinical stages, as well as having, they list 4 other drugs who are in those lab stages prior to clinical studies in different stages.
Okay. And again, just to kind of reiterate, I did the math. And again, what Jacob is saying is we subtract from the assets the liabilities, we come up with a value of $587 million, a burn rate of $40 million a quarter. That means that they got 14.6 quarters of available assets to finance themselves at their current burn rate. So divide the 4 into 14.6, and they've got a 3.66 year runway in front of them. Okay.
Yes.
If we go to Beam, give me your feelings on Beam. As I understand it, Beam has a little different medical procedure. As in my readings, I read that CRISPR with what is it called? Something 19. Cas19. It's they describe it as a scissors therapy, that the CRISPR goes in, finds the mutation, cuts it out, and then the Cas19 replaces it. Beam, on the other hand, uses a chemical therapy, and that allows them, and again, to put it in layman's terms, they believe to get into some tighter places, and to be able to get to some mutations that some of these others may not be able to get to. You concur with me on that?
Yeah, I mean that's what the company believes. We'll have to see, kind of how they end up achieving that.
Now, on your outline with me, you say in the pipeline, none. They have no workable drugs. They just have a new way of delivering CRISPR.
Yeah. So Beam's an interesting one because so a lot of these companies, they're targeting very similar diseases. Well, most of them you see something with sickle cell. Most of them you see something with oncology. Most of them you see something with some neuro stuff. So they're targeting a lot of similar things. So each company has different approaches, but Beam has a big cash pile, which is interesting. 1.15 billion in assets, 300 million in liabilities, which works out to 850 million in basically cash. Divide that by, one interesting thing with them was their last quarter they only had an operating expenses of 30 million.
Mm-hmm.
But over the last 9 quarters, they had 300 million. So I basically said the company had just a lower cost quarter and put theirs as 100 because that was the average per quarter over the last 3 quarters. And so if they have $100 million burn rate per se, then you have 8.5 quarters of operating time before the need for additional financing. For the drugs in the pipeline, they do not have any drugs in phases 1 through 3. So that's important to note. They don't have any drugs that have started those timelines of 6 to 9 months for phase 1, 1 to 2 years phase 2, 1 to 2 years phase 3. But they do have multiple drugs. I'm looking at their page right now. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They list 10 drugs that they're developing in some stage earlier in the lab stages.
Okay.
So they have a big pipeline, but nothing in it is very far along.
Okay. That to me then puts a question mark around them. And again, when we get to the end of this, what Jacob and I are going to do, and each independently, is rate them as number 1, number 2, much like a horse race. Okay.
For sure.
All right. So then let's go on to Caribou. Now, as you said, with CRISPR, which we'll get to, that's Emmanuel Carpentier. She was one of the winners of the Nobel Peace Prize. And then the second one was Jennifer Doudna, and she was active in, and I think she is still a shareholder in Editas, but she kind of got in a dispute, it was an all boys club, and she was the only girl in the office, and she didn't like the vibes, and she walked away from Editas. And she then put her emphasis into Caribou. So take it away on Caribou.
Yeah. So Caribou, it has one drug currently in phase 1. It has 461 million in assets, 57 million in liabilities, which accounts for 404 million in basically cash, which accounts for 20 quarters. With a $20 million burn rate, accounts for 20 quarters. This obviously the biggest thing is you see a $20 million burn rate and you wow, that's low.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing is the burn rates go up significantly once you go in later stages of trials because they're much larger and more expensive. Your most expensive trials are going to be your phase 3s.
Sure, that makes total sense. Okay.
Yeah. So some of these burn rates are lower than others, but don't be misled necessarily by a low burn rate thinking the company's way more efficient with cash or something.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay.
Yeah. So,
but again, I would just put in my editorializing here. This is Jennifer Doudna. If you read the book, help me out. The Code Breaker. That's the book is a story, the life story of Jennifer Doudna. She is considered the queen of this, and Emmanuel, in my mind, again, the book is tainted, I'm sure. Emmanuel kind of started underneath her and came and worked in her labs, and there's some ill feelings there, as you might expect. But Caribou has, as far as drugs in development pipeline,
they have one.
And
in phase 1.
And are you familiar with what disease that's focused on?
It's a CAR T cell. I'm not sure exactly what disease it is.
Well, I know. Okay, let's move on then to CRISPR.
It's for lymphoma.
Okay.
One thing specifically about Caribou that I think is very interesting is they place a big emphasis on specifically oncology drugs for cancer. Some of these other companies, they're going with different things. They're going in a variety of markets, some of them relatively niche markets. But Caribou's kind of going for, they're going for the biggest markets,
Yeah.
with theirs.
The one that finds the cure for cancer and heart disease is the big winner, because those are the biggest killers. Heart disease, number one. I happen to know that 1,636 people in the United States die per day from cancer.
Wow,
that's a big number. As I was explaining to someone, when they find these cures, these things are going to explode.
Yeah,
just explode. So okay, let's go on to CRISPR.
Yeah, so CRISPR is kind of the name brand in the field, I would say.
Just this editorial here. How do you get away with that? How do you get away? It's kind of like how did Kleenex developed Kleenex, but you have the actual drug, which is part of our body. CRISPR is in our body, and you get to name your company. I don't know who did that one, but that was slick.
Yeah, and it's funny because whenever you search the technology, the first company to come up is them.
I mean, yeah, Google search, genius. Okay, yeah. Let's do the numbers on CRISPR.
So they were founded by another person who helped win the Nobel Prize in chemistry. They have a lot of products. I actually wrote an article about them on Seeking Alpha. They have a lot of products in those early drug trials. And I think the most interesting thing to me for them is most of these companies, they have, they're doing some partnerships, but CRISPR, from what I saw, is probably the best or did the most partnerships. And while this is a plus and minus thing, really, because one thing it does is it helps decrease the risk, because now you're not the one solely responsible for the drug. But it also really decreases the upside, because you're not going to take all the profits for all that work.
Right.
So people have mixed opinions on it. I think it lowers the risk, but it also lowers the potential of the company. But CRISPR has probably the best cash pile of any biotech company that's so early on that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really because at one point they were valued at an insane amount. They were valued at, over like 15 or 20 billion in market cap, I think. And they didn't even really have anything past phase 1.
And that was because their price was so high.
Yeah. And the reason that price was so high was because this technology is so revolutionary. Everyone wanted in on it.
Right. And she was a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Yes.
So
it was right around that time.
You had popularity, you had everything going in their favor.
For sure. And this company and most of these companies in this space have kind of gone down recently. And I believe that's to a more fair valuation. But like you said, if once any of these get an approval, they're going to go bonanzas. But so this company has 2.8 billion in assets, 300 million in liabilities, which equates to 2.5 billion. 2.5 billion.
Right.
And 2.5 billion in cash, basically. We have $130 million burn rate, which accounts to over, so many quarters. I'm getting 19 quarters.
And as you had alluded to earlier, that's quite high relative to everybody else. But that also probably means they're further along the line of development than anybody else.
Yeah. One important thing to note for them, they have 5 drugs in the early clinical stages.
Right.
So basically, each time you're up in a clinical stage, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, it gets more and more expensive, with phase 3 being by far the most expensive. So one thing about them also, they're combining, from when I was doing my research on them, they like to combine their phase 1 and phase 2 trials. So again, that's much more expensive than a typical phase 1 trial.
Okay. All right. That's good information. All right.
So, but yeah, very, very, lots of drugs, but they also have lots of partnerships. So good because it validates them a little and helps them decrease risk. Bad because it decreases upside. So that's what to note about them.
All right. Good point. Okay. Our last drug is NTLA. My understanding is they are further along than anybody. They had a big success about, I guess it was almost a year ago, in a liver ailment drug, and they actually cured some people.
Yeah.
And that of these stocks, I think at one point I was up 200% on them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think it's a very interesting company. So they again, most of these companies are going after relatively similar areas, but they take a lot of partnerships similar to CRISPR, but their partnership mainly with one company. CRISPR partners primarily with 2 companies. But one thing I like about them is they have a lot of drugs in those early clinical stages. They actually have 4 drugs in those early clinical stages.
Okay.
Just like CRISPR, you have a lot of drugs in those early stages. They have 1.3 billion in assets, 97 million in liabilities, with so that equates to about 1.2 billion in basically cash, with a 71 million burn rate. That again is about 16.9 quarters you can have. So they're another one. So CRISPR and them, I would say, have the most products close to approval.
Okay.
But all these companies are very early on in their process. So until you get later on in the trials, you're not going to know for sure who the winner is, I would say. And even once a company gets an approval, one approval doesn't make you necessarily the winner.
No, there could be multiple winners in this.
Yes.
And it's a degree of win. I, like you, say if you find if you introduce a drug for cancer, and as I have learned in my experience, if cancer is cancer, I don't care if it's in the liver, or if it's in the lungs. Cancer is cancer. So now you may have a variation, but whoever wins that one is going to be a major winner. If someone wins heart disease, that'll be a major winner. But liver and sickle cell is certainly a disease, but it is not of the magnitude that cancer and heart disease is.
Yes.
So that's an element as well. They could win. They could give. I mean, you could get a 200x out of a drug that cures sickle cell, and then you could get a 20,000x out of a drug that cures cancer. But then you have to measure in what collaborations did they have to go into, and how is that profit going to be distributed? So it's complicated. But this, I think, I would say I am leaning very heavily, because NTLA is further down the line. That would be my number one. I think my number two would probably be CRISPR. My number three would probably be CRBU. And then I would put Editis as 4. And I'm just not as comfortable with this new technology, but no drugs on the line with Beam. But I will continue to hold Beam, because they have, and this is kind of interesting. They could be the guy who says, okay, CRISPR, you've got your way of taking care of these diseases. Let's show our way, and let's come together and broaden the scope of what your therapies cure. There's all kinds of ways this could come together. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I would definitely, if I'm investing in this space, I would take an approach kind of like an ETF, where I'm balancing it across multiple companies. What percent I put in a company would probably be based on how strongly I feel about the particular company in the space. And really, you're not going to know for sure how a company is going to end up until you get to these later trials. Specifically, remember, our lowest success rate is at phase 2. So once a company goes to a phase 3, that drug's more than likely going to get approved. And then second, once you get a drug approval, then the company's no longer based on purely speculation. Then it's based on some fundamentals, because they'll be earning revenue. My order is, I have the same top 3, the same bottom 2, but the order's a little different. I go number 1, CRISPR, just because I really like their cash basis. I like the partnership model. I know and then number 2, Intellia. I know they have a very similar approach. I think they're very similar companies. You would have to specifically look at each company and look at the drugs in which field you think is going to be better and whatnot before you invest, depending on that, in my opinion. Number 3 is CRBU. I like the leadership team there. And then I also like how they're really just targeting high potential fields primarily. While this may result in them not having any success, I feel like it's a more of a boom or bust company. So I kind of like that. They're right there at 3. Now, I actually go Beam at 4, because while they don't have any in those early clinical stages, they have a lot of products in those lab trials. So I feel like one or two of those, they'll be able to develop into those later stages, hopefully.
Okay. All right.
And then finally, Editas at 5. I think it's promising. Again, the whole industry is promising. It's just hard to rank and compete between all these companies.
Yeah, and particularly with the amount of knowledge that we don't have.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because just as a pre-qualifier, this was a very brief overview. We're not going into the specific drug actions. We're not going too deep into the trial results. We're not going into the specific fields for each drug. So this is more of an overview. So we can't necessarily say, yeah, for sure, this drug's getting approved or anything. This is, just our opinions.
Another element of this that isn't talked about a whole lot is these drugs, as they are burning this amount of money, that all goes into the cost of the drug. And I don't think it's far-fetched to say, if you go and get your genome sequenced and you go to put the needle in the arm, that shot's probably going to cost over $100,000. Okay. And so then the question is, who's going to pay for it? Yeah. And as an example of this, Biogen just came out with a drug that is to slow down Alzheimer's, and it has a price of $56,000 for a treatment. Now that's a continuing treatment. This is we believe a one-shot element. Then the question comes in: how does the insurance company come in and say we will or we won't pay for it, or we will pay this part of it? And my take on that is this: I've experienced cancer. I've seen it with my daughter. I've seen the cost of it. She was in chemotherapy for 10 years. It cost those insurance companies millions of dollars. The 4 days that she spent in the hospital at her end generated a bill of $250,000. So if I can take a shot and I can eliminate all that chemotherapy and all that respirator and hospital cost, as an insurance company, I'd rather pay up front and be done with it and not have it a part of my future obligations to the people that I've insured. This is particularly important when you get to Medicare. I just realized the drug I was talking about, Biogen, just increased my Medicare premium effective January 1st by 15%, because Medicare determined that Biogen drug was going to cost them, spread across all the recipients of Medicare, equivalent to a 15% increase in my premium. Now, who dies of cancer? Who dies of heart disease? Who dies of Alzheimer's? People on Medicare. This is a complicated equation, but you can't get past this is revolutionary. This is going to change medicine as we know it. Okay. That, I think, sums up. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you hit it well. The biggest thing is that 10 years, 15 years from now, they're going to be teaching about this probably in biology classes.
Yeah. Do you remember when? Okay, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to invite you back, and I'd like to go at it a different way. And I'd like to talk about the genome sequencing end of it. This is the therapy. Once this therapy hits, there will be lines formed to get your genome sequenced. And there are two major players that I'm aware of, and that's Pacific Bioscience and Illumina. Now, you in your outline also put in there Invate. And I think you have a better understanding of what Invate does than I do.
Yeah. Actually, in the email you sent me, you put that ticker. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because, so I just took molecular biology. And our last chapter was on genomics, personal genomics. Okay. And so we learned about, the personal genomics test. Another one, the designer babies, right. Stuff, all that stuff, right? And actually, we watched a video from their company site, about their personal genomic tests to like tell you where you're from and stuff.
Okay, so they are not a therapy company. They are a sequencing company.
They're specifically a testing company, and it's similar to a lot of these other companies, but I think it's more of like a testing for like your specific history and stuff.
So would this be comparable to 23andMe?
Yeah, that's what they have that in there. I think they have a couple other products also, but they also have an element that's like 23andMe.
Okay, so let's do our next video on Illumina and Pacific Biosciences and anybody else that we can find that is in the testing, because I think that's where we as individuals are going to have our first contact in all of this. We're gonna demand to our clinic, to our doctor, I want my genome tested, I want it sequenced, and I want to know what my propensity is for any number of diseases. And I think that is a integral part of this that we have to gain a better understanding of.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing though about these companies is a little bit different way to value these companies, because you're valuing, having a test is much more like selling a product rather than a drug, which is much more hit or miss.
Yeah, and the other element along with that is that test is, and well, that's an interesting. Do they have any ongoing revenue? Once I'm tested, am I done?
Yeah, that's something that I don't know the answer.
Yeah,
but something to look into.
Because again, my wife gets an MRI every 6 months. It's a continuing piece of revenue for General Electric, who makes the MRI machine. So let's focus on that as well. Okay. So what I'm saying to you, viewers, is Jacob and I are going to dig deeper into this, and I'll announce to you when we're coming back with chapter 2 of our series. And I'm quite sure as we get into it deeper, there will become a chapter 3 and chapter 4 that you and I will want to dig into. Okay. Anything you want to add?
No, thanks again for having me on. I look forward to coming
there's
back.
something I do want to add. Jacob is a writer for Seeking Alpha. Jacob shared with me after we did our first interview that his following went up 100%.
Yes.
Okay. We need to do that again for Jacob. We need to give him another 100% bump. We need to show Seeking Alpha that this is a very positive thing for us and for them. I would like to enter into a deeper collaboration with Seeking Alpha and get them to work with us to make us 3 things. Help us make smarter investment decisions, help us learn to keep more of what we make by understanding our tax code, and number 3, to build family wealth. I don't think any of us, very few of us, I don't think the Carnegies and the Kennedys are watching this channel. We aren't of the caliber of enormous family wealth. But if we learn, if we gather knowledge, if we're ahead of the game on this genome therapy, we could make a huge difference in our family's position on the world, the economic, because we're learning, and knowledge is power, and power quite often translates into wealth. So that's our contribution to you. And come back, like the video, go to, if you'd like a copy of this outline that Jacob and I worked from, go to Best of Us Investors, give me your name and your email address, and I'll send you an invitation to our Discord. And then I'll also be inviting you every Friday. We have at 3 o'clock after the market closes, we have a Zoom meeting where we discuss things like this. and we answer collectively questions. We want to make this investing a team sport. Okay, that's the direction this channel is going. We want to get you out of playing against Wall Street. We want to help you find those companies that are going to change the way you live early on so that you can get the exponential growth and you can create family wealth. I'll be talking to you again soon.